EagleCon.
Told you.
Yeah, I should have heeded that warning. Welcome to EagleCon 22, presented by Cal State LA. I am Zen of HCMP, High Concept Media Properties. I produce comic books for my clients and help them put it together. Also the editor of some independent books. And with us today, we have the editor of DC, Dark Horse, Barbara Kesel. How are you doing today?
Hi, good.
And we also have editor-in-chief of Aspen Comics, Vince Hernandez.
Hey guys, how's everyone doing today?
Thanks for joining us. So let's start out with a quick question, just one sentence and to answer. Barbara, what is comic book editing?
I put together lists over the years of all the things people have done under the rubric of comic book editor, and it's quite an extensive list. The basic job is guiding forward creative projects. In some cases, that means you're coming up with the original idea, initiating it and putting a crew together, and then following through with all the stages in between. At some companies, the editor is the person who opens the mail and walks things over to the printer. At some, they do sales, they do marketing, they do a little bit of everything depending on the size of the company. But the basic job is the person who guides creative works from initiation to publication.
All right, and Vince, how would you quickly define what a comic book editor is?
Well, first I'll say, that was a great answer by Barbara. I think guidance being a key word there. I would say, two words, vision and philosophy, come to mind when I think of an editor, which I think kind of speaks to what Barbara said and started with, taking on different roles and understanding that there's going to be different shoes to fill at every facet, every step of the way. So yeah.
Okay, well, Barbara, let's get into a little bit more detail. So how would you compare the editing duties that you performed at DC to Dark Horse? What was different and what was similar?
Well, at DC, the editors were, at the time I was there, things have changed somewhat. The editors were in charge of a project. So you initiated it, you either initiated the idea for something or you chose a writer and brainstormed ideas for what was coming up for the next few months, shaped that, sent that in for approval, hired the team, put the teams together in some cases, and, kept everybody's work moving along. And you make a lot of phone calls. Now it's emails, but it used to be a lot of phone calls. At Dark Horse, it was a little bit different because part of the things on my plate were creator-owned comics where you advise rather than state. And I usually say the difference this way. If I work for a company, I say your fly is open, fix it. If I work for a creator, I say your fly is open. Did you want it that way? But you are your first reader, in both cases, you're viewing everything that's going along, you're guiding it, you're talking people off the ledge when they think they have no ideas left, and then taking care of everything for them as the robot body in-house if you're not the governing agent. DC is more corporate and has to protect the trademark value of its properties. And so, every so often a character's trademark needs to be renewed, so they need to appear in a comic. At Dark Horse, it was a little bit more, we decided certain things as the company, but then your slate would be filled with ideas that had come in-house that either you came to an editor or came to the company and got put on your desk. But they were entirely the property of the person involved. And, we had publication rights. And then at CrossGen, things morphed to where we were all in-house. All the creators were in-house as opposed to freelancers, which is dramatically different in terms of the dynamics. But I was in charge of governing all the stories and kind of keeping the world Bible going, and then writing my own. So it's weird, we had no editors. So you sort of have the group response to everything you do. And you need editors. You need that dispassionate person who looks at it from the outside and says, your fly is open. So.
I'm dealing with that right now, actually, because I'm self-publishing my book, but I spend my entire career being editor, but not having an editor has been brutal because I'm like, is this a good idea? I don't think it's a good idea. I'm second guessing myself. And it's just one of those situations where you need that other voice to kind of you're great with the analogies because like pulling you off the ledge is a great one because it's like you get yourself there, by choice when you're a creator, I think a lot of times. by second guessing yourself. And that's what the editor is really great about, is really kind of to put you in your place, whether right or wrong. Oftentimes wrong, I would say, but that's kind of what you sign up for. But that's the value of an editor in most instances, is that you have that other voice before you get to, your audience, to tell you, look, this isn't working, and we get in our own heads as creators more than editors. Editors are more pragmatic, I think, and they're more able to say, look, we have to think about the consumerism angle instead of just, adhering to whatever the creator wants at any given time. So it's a thin balance, but yeah, it is like talking people off a ledge a lot of times.
Right. It's who is the audience for this title, and are we serving them? The other problem you run into all the time is people like new, people like fresh, people working on a creative property get bored in the middle of it. So they want to do something that's fresh and new and not necessarily better. So sometimes it's yanking them back to the story outline they created that was strong, that they're now bored with in the middle and want to create some innovation on it. And often that's a bad thing. Sometimes it can be a good thing. You revive something from being stale, but more often it's get back into your lane. Yeah, I'm all the metaphors and analogies. Yeah.
They work.
So Vince, can you go into an overview of some of the most common editorial duties you are in charge of at Aspen Comics?
Yeah, it's great that I am able to go on with Barbara, because she has had a bit of a different path with a lot more, I think, of the bigger publishers than me. So I've, came up with Image Top Cow, and then now I work at Aspen. I've been there for 20 years, and, we're very independent. We're a small family-owned company. So there's not a lot of corporate oversight that we have to really, place into our job duties. So, but that being said, there's a double-edged sword of a lot of freedom in that instance, because, yeah, it's great to say, oh, we can do whatever we want, but oftentimes we are also limited by what we can do budget-wise. So I've, as an editor for a company like that, it's always kind of trying to stay 2 steps ahead of whatever potential pitfall might come our way when it comes to the process. And when I say the process, I mean literally from start to finish, creating the idea of what we're going to be selling to the audience, and then putting the team together, and then making that all work within the structure of an actual deadline, and like when this product will come out. See, like, we treat everything like a product at Aspen Comics, whereas I think the average fan has their heartstrings in the comic book world in terms of, like, they think that publishers are, well, they make comic books and that's their heart and soul. But when we look at everything, it's, it's a product at the end of the day. So are we putting out the best product? How do we, balance that with being able to be profitable? That's a huge angle for any independent publisher. And honestly, that's why so many independent publishers don't last, because it's very difficult in the comic world to, balance budgets and make things work and make a profit. And it's great that these type of panels exist, because we can kind of let people that are basically coming out of college and into the workspace understand that, look, there's a lot of, dangers involved getting into business once you kind of just put your feet into the water. And you really need to understand that you have to have a love of comic books, and you have to have a love of understanding that you're probably not going to make a lot of money. We as a company, we went, years and years, not necessarily not making a profit, but losing a lot of money in the process of building our brand. And we had to stay the course. And there's been a lot of times where we were like, this might not work. We definitely lived and died by the comic book market and how the industry, has its ups and downs. And then when it's doing great, we usually do great. But when it's doing bad, like any publisher, we definitely have to navigate those waters. So, going back to your original question, it's anything at any given day. I write a lot of comics, but I also edit everything in my day-to-day process. But, right now I'm editing the backs of trading cards. So there's, every little duty in between. Going back to what I was saying, where it's like we have products versus comics. And that's kind of an interesting thing that I think a lot of people don't think about when trying to get into comics, is like the business side of it, and Barbara has so much more experience with publishers and from across the board, from like CrossGen, which is similar to what we are, where it's like an independent company that kind of dictates their own course. But then she's also worked at DC, like I said, she had to navigate different corporate mandates. So I mean, she definitely has had a much more bigger variety of editorial roles, but I think definitely have been mostly just independent my entire career. So I only have that perspective, but I think for right or wrong, it shaped my philosophy and how I approach my day to day. And I think it's been more helpful than not in terms of just being able to survive because I'm like, I can say, hey, you know what? I can live a week or two with not making so much money if it means the product's going to look beautiful at the end of the day. And I think Barbara would agree that that's really what we want when you talk about editing is the fan to read something that just blows their mind.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to say that what Vince said might have come across as very mercenary, talking about his product and displacement. At the same time, Aspen has fostered an incredibly nurturing relationship with their fans. So don't think he's all like, Mr. Corporate only.
Oh yeah.
But what I was going to say is the basic editorial duty, you kind of outlined something there, is keeping track of budget, time, and creativity, and trying to keep all of those in balance. You want it to be as absolutely good as it can be for the budget you can put on that project and the time you have to complete it. So a lot of times what you have is something that could have been better, but needed to come out monthly. So absolutely. All those things in balance, you're always pushing for all three of them. And the editor stands in the middle, especially at the large companies. The editor is the advocate for the freelancer to the company, and the advocate for the company to the freelancer. Because there's a lot of freelancers who think comic books just magically go to market and make money, and don't realize that what the publisher is bringing into it is sales and marketing and oversight and moving all the pieces along, and storage. I mean, I've seen a lot of self-publishers who are blown away by trying to figure out where they're going to store the product once it's printed, and don't realize that that is also, shipping is also a cost. Yeah, storage is also a cost. So it's kind of, when you're working with a publisher, you're working somewhat in partnership. Oh, did you want to ask another question?
Vince, you at Aspen, you guys also collaborate with Marvel and DC on some projects. So what kind of editorial duties did you perform when you did those collaborations?
Oh, it depends on the publisher again. I mean, Marvel is much more, they were, I think, much more, I don't want to say, how do I phrase this so that it doesn't come off like I'm saying anything derogatory about either publisher, but Marvel was much more hands-on with the minutia of, this is how we want things. And I thought DC, from my perspective, because I definitely worked less with DC, just generally due to how the timeline worked with me and working at Aspen. That was a lot of the early stuff at Aspen, was the DC Market Turner stuff. I didn't do as much of that. I did definitely do a lot more of the Marvel stuff, and that was very exhausting, I'll be honest. So we did the Civil War Black Panther miniseries, and it just didn't line up well with our timeline of fostering new artists at Aspen, because we were still a very young company, and this is none of this is to say that the book didn't come out amazing, because it did. But from an editorial perspective, it was a very tedious process, because Marvel had a very particular set of mandates they wanted to do. And rightfully so. I mean, their brands are 60, 70, 80 years old now, and they have, things to protect with those. So I understood that. But we were also at the time trying to bring in new talent beyond Michael Turner, who had been the only artist that sold any good product for our company for the first couple of years by choice. He was our owner. So it just made the most sense. But we obviously wanted to have a future of new artists coming in and representing us. And we were still trying to get those people, the right people. And it just wasn't the right time, I felt, looking back, to put some of them on these giant projects, because it just didn't work out. And, we lost actually one of the artists at the time, not lost, but it became the last project we worked with him on for a while, because he kind of came to an about face of understanding that he just wasn't up to the day-to-day. Marvel wanted a page every day, no matter what. They wanted to see artwork, and they wanted to see artwork on the level that they expect. And this artist was a great artist, but he wasn't ready for that type of pressure and workflow, and it just broke him down to a point where he said, look, I need to take a break from comic book drawing for a while and really figure out, you know, my path. And at the same time, we were like trying to prove ourselves to Marvel. So it was just a very exhausting situation. It ended up still coming out great, but it taught me my very first lesson in understanding that I'm pretty lucky working at an independent publisher, because a lot of times when you work for a company like Marvel, you're not necessarily in control of the end result. You aren't, I mean, every time. So there's always going to be hands coming in that are going to need to touch it and shape it. And so that's great. But if that's not what you're looking for, you know, it's not for you. And for me, it wasn't at the time. But, you know, I look back and I cherish those memories, especially seeing all the movies come out. I'm like, wow, we had a great hand in shaping some of those stories that, you know, came up on the screen. And no one will ever know that, you know, and that's great. I don't really care about the credits of all that, but it's just fun to see that on the screen, see how people have reacted to some of that stuff. And they never will know the heartache and some of the stories, you know, and I'm sure Barbara has tons more stories of that type of stuff with, you know, top flight talent, where it's like, you don't know the actual story behind some of your most beloved books, and how they came to be.
Would you like to follow up on that, Barbara?
Well, I have many stories that can't be told, but yeah.
I know at some point I was like, I didn't say this story.
Well, as I'm fond of saying to people at my lectures, there's art and there's commercial art. When you do art, there's no rules except the ones you put on it. When you do commercial art, the minute you put a price tag on your work, it is commercial art, whether it is being sold directly from you or being sold, or services sold to a company like within publication. Once you make it commercial art, you are subject, no one owes you a sale. You are subject to the conditions of the marketplace. And you can't, you know, if you put a price on things and they don't sell, your price is too high for the market. If you put a price that's too low and it sells too quickly, you need to evaluate that. But once you put a price on it, the person seeing the work is evaluating it based on the purchase action, not just admiring it as art. So the criticism gets heavier and harsher. But once you're doing commercial art, you're doing it to the parameters of the market or of the publisher or of the agency, your patron, whoever is paying you to produce that art. So I have artists who come in to do commercial comics who are like, it's not fair. They're telling me I have to change my art. I go, you're providing a service for a publisher. If you want no one to touch your beautiful art, publish it yourself. But if you are doing it through a publisher, you are subject to their parameters. And those parameters may have to do with content. They may have to do with file size. They may have to do with range of colors that can be used in printing. But if you try to fight those parameters, you will not be successful. If you accept them as some of the best damn work out there ever came from people being in a small box, and they had to figure out a way to be artistically clever and to serve that artistic impulse and stay in a very small box. So you'll sometimes find weird license books that have extraordinary art or writing because that person was like, well, the box is this wide. How can I stand out in it? How can I show off my work? But I'm reaching that point where I'm old and cranky and I have so little patience for people who are like, well, I want you to pay me lots of money for my work, but I want it to do exactly the way I want to do it. And I don't want you to have to push me on the deadline. And it's like, no, honey, if you're doing work for me on this project at this deadline, I'm expecting you to make that deadline. So I'm expecting you to govern your work and figure out how to do it in that time. So Vince, you were talking about the guy who wasn't up to doing the professional work. One of the things I always tell artists is people say, I want to be an artist. And I say, okay, what's your page rate? How long does it take you to do a page? Well, I'm working this job or I'm going to school and I've never figured that out. I said, well, find 2 weeks of vacation. During that 2 weeks of vacation, you pretend you're a professional artist. A professional artist these days has, what's your page count, Vince, on comics? It's 20 on the big companies. What's yours?
Yeah, we're 20 now too.
Okay, so 20 in 4 to 5 weeks, you have to produce 4 to 5 pages of art a week to be able to do that professionally and monthly. Now, some schedules mean that a book is coming out as a mini series, so the schedule can be stretched and maybe the artist gets 2 months per book, whatever. Assume you're doing a monthly. Assume you need to do 20 pages in a month. So take your vacation, your 2 weeks, do nothing but draw as though it is your job and see if you can produce work of an exceptionally, professional quality at the rate of about a page a day or 4 to 5 pages a week. Because if you can't do that, then you can't do the job professionally. And people learn ways to cut corners. You can see comics where there's a couple of pages where they've gone without backgrounds. They've gone for, minimalism in a way that they can produce quickly. Well, that's a schedule maker. That book needs to go out the door at a certain time. So the artist cannot spend 6 hours on every panel, because that adds up to more than a day. so you kind of go through a book and pick your shots. You'll see that the pros sometimes have a panel or two that's done lovingly, and others that are brief, or they involve repetition of stat panels or techniques that evolved to save time. Because the other aspect of that being professionals, depending on what your page rate is, there are artists now working for like $50 a page, and there are artists working for $1,000 a page. So what you need to make doing this work is related to the idea of how long it takes you to do it, and how at what level of quality you can do it. And I don't know if we're talking just artists or writers here. I mean, obviously you're going to take in some questions at the end, right?
If there are some questions, definitely.
Okay. Well, we'll make some up if needed.
I've never done a virtual panel. It's fun.
Well, there was one submitted, so we definitely have one. And I mean, I have questions whenever.
Hey, we can fill space. Don't worry.
Exactly.
but we want to be saying what people want to know about.
Right. So let's talk about actual production of a comic book page and a comic book. So before an actual script is written, how much input do you guys have before anything is actually written down on a page?
That depends on the where and the when. I've done everything from initiating the title concept, to building the characters and building the framework, and then hiring people to execute it, to things like Star Wars Dark Empire that walk in the door and I just make sure that it moves through nicely and give feedback, but I don't have to do any of the initial groundwork. So it's very much dependent on the project, but it can be the concept. It can be, item 0 on the list.
Yeah, I would echo exactly what Barbara said, because it's very fluid. I mean, I could think of projects situations where I just spoke with a creator at a convention and I was like, oh, that can make us money. Let's fast track something like that. And then we talk, to the appropriate people and make it happen over a span of a few weeks. And then there's been projects where it's like, we've developed it for 2 years and just can't seem to find the right time to make it work. Or, I can think of 2 projects right now that at Aspen that we literally have started, and just for reasons outside of the actual comics worth, it didn't make sense to put it out. And so we have kind of put those aside and focus more on things that are maybe more profitable, more in line with our philosophy at the moment. But that starting point is always so fluid to me. It's also, I think, speaks to what the editors, what people's perception of an editor is, and 2, what our actual role is. Because coming into this, like I always come into these panels, these editing panels, which, by the way, Barbara was the first to kind of start these, where she would bring in all these different editors to talk about panels, and throughout the years they've kind of morphed into different ones. And but when I think the very first one that she asked me to be on, and then there's like the ones we've done at different cons, it always kind of comes down to explaining what our job is. And I think that's always the biggest overarching misconception from the comic book fan, is that they don't really know what an editor is. And I think often an editor doesn't really know what our role is, because it's so different for every publisher, as we've already explained. Mm-hmm. But with what we do at Aspen, it's like, it just comes down to timing. I would say a lot of times, like, we've had projects with people outside of the comic book world where they, their agent or somebody brought us an idea they had, and we said, well, that person is really hitting all the right notes in multimedia or a different medium that we think we might be able to pull their fans in. And then, it took 2 months to really pull a team together and get it going. And then, like I said, there's been ones that, for whatever reason, we just can't start. But going back to what Barbara said and what I kind of agree with, is like, there's no real set way to do it. Like, there's no form you pull out of a file cabinet and go, okay, now for the next 14 days, we have to develop this idea to a point where it's going to be profitable and commercially viable, and then we'll start on this day. It just doesn't happen like that. Even as the book is being produced, like drawn and written and lettered, as there's changes being made that affect the actual narrative to a point where it's not what it was when we first started. So, you know, being a good editor, it's like you kind of have to understand that that's the process. That one, our starting point is never going to be similar to what the end point is, and two, it's going to change a lot, but it's also has to stay. And this kind of contradicts what I just said, but it doesn't. It has to stay on the course, even if it changes in ways that are like unforeseen. The editor's biggest role, I think, is to always keep it on course no matter what, and that involves scheduling and artistic written changes, which is right. We haven't really talked about the writing part of it, but that's always the first real narrative starting point for any project is is the story worth doing, you know? And I've had situations too where, yeah, it's like we had a great concept, but then for whatever reason, once the script came in, it didn't have the same, you know, vibe for the younger kids in the room. You know, it just didn't have that same feel. And sometimes you lose it from the concept to the script, which is sad, but it happens, you know, and that's again, as an editor, you mitigate that process and say, look, you know, this is what we wanted it to be. And as we've gotten further along into the script, it's kind of fallen off that course. Can we get it back in that direction?
I want to add two things to what Vince just said there. Number one is in terms of when does that start? The job may start long before the story exists, because you may be part of the people deciding what your publishing company is going to produce. And so that's one where you want to determine what you think your customer base is going to be, and what range you want to have available in relationship to them, how you want your comics to look, how you want them to present, what level are you at, you know, like what rating, whatever, and where do you think you're going to sell them? How are you going to sell them? All those things editors may be involved with. The big arcs, publishing arcs for a company, what's coming up next, not just the individual titles, but what's our company going to be about producing. You may also be involved there. And the most important insight on editing is that you're doing everything all at once. For every publishing schedule, for every issue, you're at benchmarks along the way. So on one day, you might be looking at a concept and want a plot for another, a script for one, the pencil art, the ink art, the coloring, the lettering, the corrections, the logo placement, the design, cover designs, marketing materials, etc. So everything is coming at you right away. So again, one of the biggest complaints you get from people is, I sent you a script, I sent you a spec script, why didn't you read it? Well, some companies do or don't accept those, but even if it's by invitation, an editor is usually trying to find the 8th day of the week to cram in reading things, because art you can glance at and know if it's good or bad. You might study it to see where the weaknesses are, to see if it can be helped, but you know right away, good, bad, you know, it communicates, doesn't communicate. With writing, you have to sit down, have uninterrupted time to actually focus on it, and then look at it and kind of analyze it. So it's harder for writers to break in through scripts. It's easier for writers to break in through having a best friend who's a great panel artist. But in all these things with an editor, your concentration is consistently challenged, because then you're also making emails or phone calls to creators, trying to coax them off the ledge, trying to gently explain to them that the pile of poop they turned in needs some fixing because it's not as successful. We're not accepting it as is, or marketing just called and we have to make a change to this, so let's brainstorm ways to fix this story and put it together. Or or you're doing things like chasing down song rights, or you may be doing all those properties. Some of those things may be passed off to somebody else. You may be writing marketing copy. You may be putting together ad layouts, whatever, but you are always being interrupted. There's always a constant to-do list that's too long. And so you have to do daily triage and sometimes hourly to jumble getting things out the door. This is due in production in 5 minutes, you know.
It's great that you said the thing about the songwriting, getting the license, because I spent one day just Googling different Japanese translations, because one artist decided to draw a scene of downtown Tokyo and put write 10 different things on 10 different billboards. And so it fell to me to double check to make sure there was nothing offensive and nothing that didn't make sense. And I do not know Japanese, so that was fun. But that, goes to speak to what she was saying about, you're gonna get sidetracked on so many things that you never even thought about being an editor. I think personally, I think that's fun.
as I've had my periods of comic editing where I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. But after 20 years of it, I've kind of come to the realization that there's no other job like this where you can kind of just oversee a project from start to finish with creative people on such a personal level. I've worked in TV for a little bit, and it was not like this at all. It was very just methodical, and people had one role, and you didn't kind of go outside of that unless you really had a lot of power within whatever project you were on. But comics is very different, from the top down to the bottom. Everybody has a voice, and that voice affects the overall product hugely. And to be able to have an artist draw a page that goes right back to the editor to make like their day a living hell, I think is kind of interesting and always fascinating that you never know what you're going to get. And I've learned a lot through this. It teaches me as an editor, hey, now I can tell you, stay away from the Shinjuku area of Japan if you're a foreigner, because you might get mugged, and I never knew that before, but comics has taught me that. So it's like things like this, you never really understand till after the fact. They're like, look, I learned something out of this. I grew as an editor as well. And then, that you grow out of every project, but in ways that you didn't expect, I think is the fun, fascinating thing about comic book editing. Kind of speaking to these college students that, it's like you're at this point where everything is so new and fresh and fun. And, inevitably, when you become a professional, you lose that, and you kind of become methodical, and you understand the game to a point where it gets a little bit less fresh and less exciting. But you guys who have that now and coming into this world, hold on to that as long as you can, because you're gonna, it's a great time right now. And you get crowdfunding, you have different platforms to make and sell your comics, and there's different editors out there. Get an editor, like Barbara said, because like I'm doing projects by myself, and I need an editor. And it's like you really gotta find somebody to help with your voice, and also to, like she said, talk you off the ledge. That might be the phrase of this panel, I'm guessing, which is hilariously close to suicidal reference. But comic books, in a lot of ways, is talking people off ledges and understanding that you can't do things, which sounds kind of limiting, but it's not. It's about understanding the commercial aspect of getting into being a professional. It's like kind of what she says, like sacrifice. You have to put your creative pride at the door and come through and understand what the overall project requires of you. And sometimes people aren't ready for that, and sometimes people aren't cut out for that, and that's okay too. I think a lot of people coming out of college and into the professional landscape, they feel too often that they have to fit inside a box, and there's no box in comics. You can be whoever you want. People will come to you if you're talented and you have the ability to get something out there into the world that's good and keep doing it. Even if you can't, sometimes in comics, if you can put out really good quality work, it'll sell, and you don't necessarily always have to keep doing it all the time. I recommend you do, because to me, there's just so many better. I take pride in really being a fan of people that have done it for so long consistently. Your Mark Bagleys, your Brian Bendis's, the people that really just have put out great work that have never stopped. I think it's really easy to write an amazing story and then take 6 years off, but a lot of people don't have that benefit. I don't think anybody here on this panel has the benefit to just take 6 years off and not do anything. But, oddly enough, some people in comics have been able to just do projects at their will. But I always like the guys and women, obviously, who just keep doing it, just stay consistently busy, putting out quality work. That's very hard.
Okay, I'm chuckling because I'm hearing Vince talk to the kids as though he's this old guy who's been around forever. From my perspective, he's still one of the new kids. And the people he's citing as being around for a long time are the new kids. So.
I think of Barbara in a more like a mentor way, but I've also spoken to you in like, this actually talks to what we were saying earlier. It's like, we've spoken about, hey, you should write something with us. We should do something together. And, timing and projects being what they are, sometimes they just don't work out. But I've always kind of looked at Barbara as like, not an older generation, like a mentor type, because you've been there so much that you've done so many different projects. But yeah, I guess, I don't know. I also look young. So people tell me I look younger than my age, but half my life I've been in comics, oddly enough. I started very young when I was 18, and here I am at 41. But yeah, definitely.
You're a youngster.
Yeah, I still have a lot of like, I need more stories like Barbara to start getting under my belt. Because
You know how old I am, right?
I do not know.
61. No, am I 61 or 62? What year is this? 61.
Yeah, but you know, like it's like I still feel young, and I'm sure you could say the same thing. It's like
I'm 12 around my comic book collection.
yeah, we all go to Comic Cons and we're all just kids again, and we're all still doing. Honestly, I think we're doing more kid-like stuff than kids these days. You know.
Okay, what I'm doing now, to cut in on that, right now my official title this week is creative director. Apparently next month it'll be producer of a company called Urus Entertainment that you won't find online because we're in stealth mode. I've been working on this project since 2017. It is, I work for a tech startup that's combining a new computer technology that will be demonstrated first through comic style stories that you'll see on your phone. And so it involves some new bells and whistles that I can't talk about, but it's weird because I've basically disappeared. I have been working my ass off 7 days a week for 3 or 4 years now on something that hopefully you'll see by the middle of next year, but I can show you nothing. I can talk about nothing. So it's so eerie because I feel like I should walk around with a t-shirt that says I'm writing a screenplay. because I'm working, we're building an app, you know.
You have those paycheck stubs.
But
that's all that matters. You can show
well,
them.
the paychecks are there, but it's the same. I've worked my way up. At DC, I created titles. At Dark Horse, I helped create a universe and start off things like Hellboy. And I'm responsible for Kelly Jones's career because he was leaving comics before DC and then followed over to Dark Horse. And and then at CrossGen, we created a comic universe. Here, I'm helping to create the company and the culture and the structure in addition to characters and stories and things. So I'm building like this big game board that other people will write and draw, but sort of creating this underlying structure and rules to it and all that. And it's so cool because I'm like, I feel like I'm at the first company again, that exciting first start on something. And so I do encourage you, whatever you go out and do in the world, a lot of people panic because they think they have to have a career doing what they love. And this whole idea of follow your bliss carries you so far. But for some people, it doesn't work. I would say at least 50% of the creators in comics have full-time jobs or part-time jobs. Comics is their side gig because the payment from it is irregular and unpredictable. And so it's kind of nice to have that solid structure to lean on. But you are not in any way a failure if your passion work is not your full-time job. You just have to figure out a way to balance those two. And people who say, I have a job, so I can't find time for writing. I start explaining to them how many people have written novels or comics or things like that with a full-time job. You have to choose to carve that time out of your day. Because when you really start looking at it, we all waste a lot of time each day. If you look at how much time you're on the internet or just farting around watching TV, you can pull a minimum of a half hour or an hour out of your day to do whatever that thing is that you want to do. If you're sitting down there and you say, I want to work for Pixar someday, you look at the amount of skills you're going to have to need, but then you look at the people they've hired all seem to come down to personality, character, and the ability to have put out work showing their personality in their work, having sort of a strong and definite viewpoint, and backing it up with skills is good. It's not always necessary. Sometimes the people who talk a good game there are some comic artists who don't write really well, but what they do is visualize well or pull things together well so that the next person down the chain is able to enact that story beautifully because of the work that they've done. So whatever it is that you're looking at doing in the future, there is always some time for it. Just because you want to be a professional painter or writer or artist or screenplay writer or director, things like that, just because you want to do it doesn't mean circumstances are going to make it. You can have the talent, the skills, the background, and the degree and not have it work out for you because sometimes timing and luck play a role. But you can always do what you want to do. You just might have to do it at a scale that works for your life. And you are not a failure if you can't directly make a living off of art.
I think it almost makes you more of a success story if you're able to do what you said. It's like, hey, I have a full-time job because I have to support my family. I have to pay these bills, but I sacrifice, TV and, going out with friends to kind of forward my own personal passion that I want to do. To me, I'm like, oh, those people too. I mean, that's a huge success to me, is like somebody who understands that they have to give up a little to gain something more. And that kind of is, I mean, that's a huge aspect of a lot of people's day-to-day routine in comics. Unfortunately, just comics is not a medium that pays like video games or TV. And I like that about comics, to be honest. I think keeps it charming in a way. It keeps comics a medium that's more creatively friendly to people to be able to do ideas that may not be something you'd see in TV or film, and I still feel like comics has that edge over a lot of mediums, where it's like you'll see something in comics and feel like, wow, I never even thought of something like that. I rarely see that in TV and film anymore. There's great things that pop up, but there's always going to be a comic every few years that just rattles my brain to a point where I'm like, wow, I'm jealous. I wish I could have thought of a concept like that and executed it like that person did. But so I do like the aspect that comics has a little bit more of a small town charm. Going back to what Barbara, sorry, I jump off a rant sometimes, a new rant, but to what Barbara said too, I think a lot of people leave school and look all about being the professional, being the success and making money, but also there are people out there who will like your work even if your talent hasn't caught up to you yet, and you should cultivate those people. If I could go back to Vince, when I was 18 and just starting out creating comics and making my own stuff, I wish I could have pushed more to really cultivate the people that love my work and really, understood the value of your fans versus trying to get accolades or understand that, oh, I'm going to get huge money out of this project. No, I mean, at the end of the day, having one fan who loves your work can really carry your career way further, and so, now I try to really, it's almost like, I hate to say it like this, but being likable is oftentimes much more valuable right when you're starting out than having talent that people are blown away by, because you can always work and continually get better and have that talent catch up to you. But oftentimes if you're not that likable, if people just don't like your stuff, I mean, it's hard to go the other way. And I've seen careers take off from people that are just downright likable. People like them on social media. They like maybe the ideas or what they bring to the table. And it's, I could sit here and be like, it's not really for me. I don't really see the value. I don't see the quality in the work, but that's me. And that's what's great about comics, is like somebody could say, look, I have an idea. I'm not an Alex Ross level artist, but this is me bringing my idea to the forefront. And, people will like it. There will be people out there that will get behind you no matter what. I think there's a fan out there for everything. No matter, even if it's something that you might think is trash, somebody likes it. There was going to be a trash man out there who likes trash, and it speaks to what's great about creative work in general. It's like, we could all sit here and Barbara, especially because I think Barbara, you're like Eisner judge this year, from what I heard,
Yeah.
So like, there's people who will judge your work on a level of like critical acclaim, but that's not to say, and I'm not trying to contrast the process of the Eisners, but like, there'll be fans for people that aren't award-winning creators, and then there might be somebody out there who loves your work just as much as somebody who's an Eisner-winning or creator, and I think that's what's great about comics, is like there's something for everybody. And being a great editor, I think you should understand that, even at a level of like, look, this talent that we're bringing in, it's not there. They're not there yet. But if we stay on the course with them, they will be there, and we will reap the benefits of that. That's happened with us a lot at Aspen, and I'm sure Barbara knows that, CrossGen was basically built on that. I felt like, of, guys that were like, these dudes are ready to blow up. These guys are the guys. But I won't speak to her experiences.
So
Yeah,
I wanted to ask about when you get a script on your desk. So what are you looking at in that script to make it a successful comic, to make the art the best, to make the writing the best? What influence do you have on that script once it has been written?
Number one, that it fits into the story length. If I have 20 pages, it means you have 4 to 5 panels per page to tell a story with. You start loading it. You can load one page with 10 panels and another with 1. You can have some pace. You want pacing. So you want it to have some kind of flow. You want to make sure it's not too overloaded so that it can actually be drawn. You want to make sure it follows the outline that they've set up, or there's a reason for the digression from that. You want to make sure that the panel descriptions are clean and clear. A lot of people don't realize that the writer indicates what to be drawn in each panel. They think the writer just fills in these mysterious word balloons that appeared, and that's not the case. We do the underlying architecture for the story. Now, in some styles, the artist can contribute much more to that than others, but basically the script should be something complete and understandable on its own that the artist then interprets in art form. And you're watching for not too many words per panel, which is why I need better editors, because I like lots of words and sometimes people don't take the hedge trimmers to them. And you're watching for character voice, consistency in character voice. The fact you want, if everyone sounds alike, the story is boring. So you need a different meter and pace to different kinds of characters. And you make sure they're not putting things into the script that aren't going to make it past legal or licensing or any other governing bodies. Anything I missed, Vince?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Nothing further to add to her point, really. I mean, she hit it good.
Okay, so then the script goes off to the artist, and now you have maybe a layout. What feedback do you have to that layout?
Depending on the artist and their experience, I might see layouts to know that they can actually do the visual storytelling, but they might just deliver the pencils because they're experienced and trustworthy, and I know that everything's going to be fine on that level. When the pencils come in, you're watching for unintended art, shall we say, or as we used to say, the penis filter, where
Sorry, I didn't
sometimes artists like
my
to be
age
cute,
laughing out loud.
and sometimes things are just accidental shapes that went wrong. And so you're reviewing to make sure, like on something like the new Teen Titans, I've got a character style guide. So I'm making sure Cyborg has his 2 bands on each thigh, etc. All the pieces are in place. And then it goes off to the inker. In these days, usually it's a digital file that goes to the inker who prints out blue lines and then inks over that. In the old days, we actually got the physical art boards in. And then lettering, however the lettering happens, whether it's computer composite or it's done on the boards. Coloring, same thing. Usually it's a color file now so that that original art is not going anywhere but the original artist's desk. And again, watching all those things against model sheets to make sure that people are not changing costume colors or suddenly turning blonde or something like that. But also in each of those stages, you're making sure, in the pencils, you're making sure the story is clear. In the inks, you're making sure that the story is still clear, that the inker hasn't inadvertently left something out, it changed the shape of something. Put ink over lines, not understanding what the form is supposed to be. In the coloring, same thing. You're making sure I can still read the story and that things don't suddenly mush together. Like what's happened in the age of new bleed pages is quite often the 2 pages will go together at the spine. We used to have that white gutter all around. And so you'll create an inadvertent reading arrangement that goes across when it's supposed to go down or vice versa. So you need to make sure by the coloring stage, you watch each stage to make sure the reading pattern is clear. There's a lot of tricks for how to lay out a panel to guide the eye to the next one. Like if you look at your Zoom pages, if I do this, you're looking at the panel next door. Your eye's going that way. You're following the gesture of the body. If I'm leaning this way, your eye goes to the one on the other side of me. So all these factors work into the comprehension of a page. And you're making sure that all the words are spelled right. All the words are actually in the balloons. Nothing got left out along the way. When you proofread, best tip I ever learned from Marv, proofread forward and backwards and then up and down. Forward to make sure you can just read it, backwards to look at each word, and then down to look at each letter and make sure that, pieces are clear. And looking for the tails going to the right people. Happens so often that they go to the wrong one. You can find many things in print that have gone that way. And you're watching to make sure everything's within its print margins. And anything else? Vince?
I mean, maybe just to add an overarching thought to what she said, I also feel like very strong editing is understanding that the layout stage is going to really be dependent on the artist and what their style is, because going back to her original point was like, you can work with some artists that you've worked with collaborated with for over a decade or so, and you're like, look, I know what they have on the page is gonna ultimately hit the mark, even if it maybe they threw just a few lines on the layout. Then there's new artists where they'll turn in a really loose layout where you can't tell anything, and you're like, no, I do not trust you enough to know that you're gonna hit the right notes here. And so it definitely, I think that's another kind of good question that really speaks to an editorial strength that is overlooked a lot of times. Is understanding what you're working with when it comes to every little facet of the process. And with layouts, I think that's huge. It's like, look, this artist, I know I trust in their ability to come from this very raw, loose structure of lines to the finished page. But then again, there's times where you're like, look, no, this is wrong. And again, I mean, the things that Barbara was just saying are things that I, learned as I went along. Nobody ever taught me a lot of that stuff from like right to left and reading, how speed works from the way your eye moves left to right. And, going backwards is a different, set of rules and principles. So it's like, when I first started editing, I didn't know any of that. I didn't know it. I was like making it up as I went along, trying to teach a lot of these artists, but I was still learning a lot of it. Now I feel much more comfortable in applying what I know to teach younger artists or people that maybe just missed it. But just that thought that it comes down to a lot. And I think that's with speaking again to the bigger processes. Like I think strong editing is understanding that with every step of the way is what each talent at every process editor or writer, down to the letterer. I don't say down as down. I literally the process of once it gets down to the letter, the book's pretty much done. You have to understand who they are, what they bring to the table, and how they work. Because oftentimes I've driven myself into a frenzy. I still do it where it's like I don't understand how they are doing what they do, and I need to take a step back and learn that. Look, they're going to give me what I need, or they're not, and that's going to be something you learn as an editor. You still always battle that. I think I've hired people, recently where I'm like, it didn't necessarily turn out how I wanted, but you always have to trust in the talent. And I think, being an editor is all about putting your trust in that person to do what they do best. And you have to really understand.
Well, and sometimes you have to call your shots because sometimes you have to step in. Like, again, on the layout stage, let's say that the page calls for a conversation. Well, sometimes you have the artist who draws the huge pinup of the girl down the side because their rationale is, well, the original art will be worth more. And you go, well, that's nice, but you took away the focus of the page. The focus wasn't supposed to be the giant girl down the side. The focus is supposed to be the emotional dynamic on these pages. I know they're boring for you, but that's what needs to happen. Or the big action scene that's put into a tiny panel because I didn't feel like drawing it. And sometimes you have to send it back saying the point of that panel, that story element is to show that moment. And there's times where sometimes you have to take it. You just have to accept it as is what they did because of that trilogy of time, money, talent, and what you choose from. We have a question at the bottom that I wanted to address, which is, do editors hire proofreaders? Quite often the editor is the proofreader. And so you usually call in anyone and everyone else you can to look at it, because no matter how good your proofing skills are, something will make it by, especially when you've looked at it so many times. At DC, they had a separate proofreader who'd look at everything. I don't know if they still do. Everybody thinks that spell check is a proofreader, and it's not the same thing at all. But proofreading has to do, on the editorial level, has to do with making sure the story elements are there, making sure all the character design pieces are there. If you've got a character who's always got a bracelet, make sure they didn't get not drawn in one panel, and making sure all the words are in the balloons and they're the right words. But usually it's us. Vince, is it you, or do you have somebody outside that you look at that looks at it?
No, it's me, and we do have several people look at it because of the way we're structured, but they're kind of two editors basically. But yeah, it kind of falls to the editor. I would say that's the single most pointed to thought when people think of comic book editors, is that we're the proofreaders, similar to prose novelists, almost to the point where it's like we have to kind of explain to people like that's not the full gist of what we do, is just the proofreading part. Because I think a lot of times people apply the prose editor's role to comic book editors just because they have the same title, but they're very different. And it can be confusing for reasons like this, where it is because we do the proofreading as well. but we also do so much more. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's just a smaller part of our, I look at it as like one of the parts of the process down the road where we're going to have to give it that
An
one
item on the
forward.
checklist.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, we're gonna miss it. I mean, I could look at almost everything we've done and point to something that didn't turn out how we wanted it, and there's just straight up errors. Where it's like,
There's always stuff you miss.
yeah, you learn that like, you know, you're gonna have them. I mean, it's like anything. You're like an athlete in that regard, where it's like you're gonna have games where you don't score a run, and you just have to keep your head up and go to the next game. It's like those are comics. You're gonna mess up, and you're gonna have to keep going. And you know, the comic fan, for the most part, is very forgiving in that element. I think half the time because they don't see it or realize that it's an error. So, you know, they're just kind of if you bring entertainment to them, I think you get a little bit of forgiveness in certain aspects, and I think that's one of them. It's like, look, if you can keep producing good fun talent or good fun entertainment for them, they'll give you a little forgiveness if you have an error every once in a while, and you know, or they just won't notice it, which I oftentimes hope for. You know.
And Jennifer
Okay.
asks, so what materials are recommended for editing?
Good knowledge of story and grammar, good knowledge of basic story structure, both from kind of materials on comics are out there and they're sometimes adequate and sometimes not, but we are sort of a hybrid of regular prose storytelling and film. But the thing the editor has to remember is panels don't move. And you can't load them up with you can't tell everything in words. So looking at a lot of comics, kind of doing your own analysis of them. I often have writers I always say, take a comic, but don't take your favorite comic because you'll ruin it. Take a comic and write a script from it, and then you put it away and come back and look at it. And can you understand what's going on the page from your panel descriptions? Do you, look at this dialogue, feel the shape and size of it? Like, this is like the instruction given to writers to type out a couple of pages from a book, because it looks different in typewriter aspect than it does in printed aspect. So you want to get a sense of the meter and rhythm of the work that you are trying to produce. You want to have a good overview of some basic knowledge of art is good. And I don't mean looking at comics, I mean actually studying art. And how to deal with people, I'd say management books that cover difficult conversations, because there's nothing worse than calling someone up and telling them their series has been canceled, calling them up and telling them they've been replaced for whatever reason, or calling them up and telling them your story is awful, we need to fix it. Your art is awful, we need to fix it. Which you never phrase that way. but that's the gist of the tough conversation times. You can't shy away from addressing those problems at each stage.
Yeah, I would.
What else, Vince?
Those are great. I think, that's all prime for what you need to kind of learn, especially the technical aspects, because you might get exposed here and there from a talent who's like, look, I did it this way because it's right. And you're like, oh yeah, you are right. You're right. And so you kind of have to learn some of that stuff. I would say, again, I'm not an artist, so I've made it 20 years, learning and understanding, but knowing that I can't do it. So I think Barbara hit the nail on the head there too. It's like, look, just learn the process so you know what's going on. It doesn't necessarily mean you are that tool, but it's always good to know as much as possible. And I would say the internet, primarily social media, being that part of the internet where you have that amazing tool that Barbara didn't have and I didn't have when I started. It's like, look, go on to Facebook groups. And here's one thing that I think a lot of people don't do. Okay, so you love comics, you're a fan of comics, but you actually want to work in comics. Reach out to the people that are doing the comics you love. One, comic book creators secretly love people reaching out to them and giving them accolades for their work. I never met one who doesn't love that, and whoever says they don't is lying.
Especially at conventions, and not by sending an email you expect to get answered.
Yes, exactly. And here's the thing. It's like, you guys are in this group or watching this, mostly going to be students, I assume. You have this amazing opportunity ahead of you to really build these bridges to all these creators you love, and going to conventions and making friendships and being honest with them and everybody with what your intentions are will be huge for you. Because if I met people that, look, I want to be a comic book writer, and that sets them apart from the fan. I'm like, okay, I know what that guy's intentions are, or woman's intentions are. I know what they're bringing to the table, and they want what they want. And those type of people always tend to succeed because it's like they put that ether out of the world,
and they build those bridges, but they put themselves in the right opportunities to succeed. It's so great to be a comic book fan and read the books and say, I want to work in that medium. But if you're not out there really putting yourself in the position to succeed, you're never going to really do it. And that involves meeting these creators and saying, look, I want to be a part of what you are. Then, it's not going to work overnight. But if you keep putting yourself in the right positions and obviously working on your craft at the same time, eventually you're going to get an opportunity to show your stuff, or at least put your foot in the right place to get going. I 100% believe that. It's going to come down to effort and what you put into it.
One important addition to that: don't think you're going to make points by coming up and saying this work is crap, or this is really bad, or why did you do this terrible thing? Don't you want to? If you want to communicate to people, come up and state your intentions, like you said, but also understand just because you want something doesn't mean you're going to get it.
Yeah, don't punch down to get up.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and I wouldn't say I ever did that, but it took me a while to learn that, like, sometimes creators tend to be really competitive. You just have that mindset where you're like, this person's doing that and this person's doing this and I should be doing this. And you don't took me many years to realize, like, look, I'm on my own path. Just do what I do. It's not necessarily, I'm not tethered to the industry and what's happening here or there or whatnot. And sometimes you do look at that, and Barbara's right. It's like, sometimes, your natural tendency is to try to, oh, that guy's not there. That, that you're not putting something in there. I can do better, but don't do that. Don't do that.
As Dick Giordano used to say, somebody would come up to him and say, why, I want to work for you. My art's good. I'm as good as Pablo Marcos. Why are you not hiring me? To which Dick would say, I already work with Pablo Marcos. I know him. I know his work well. It's good. It's consistent, etc. You don't have to be as good as Pablo Marcos. You have to be so good you knock him off my list. So keep that in mind too, is if you come up to an editor and denigrate someone they're working with, what you're doing is insulting them, because they're the person who's chosen to work with them for whatever reason. They may not even like them, but there's something to be said for the people who are strongly consistent and present and known, versus the unknown, whose consistency you don't know, whose quality you don't know, whose performance, personality you don't know. So you make no points with negativity.
Yeah.
And negativity is like the language of the internet. So be careful.
100%. I see it every day with people. Everyone is so negative, and they just bring such a toxic energy to everything. And people on the internet want to bring everything down. And if they see something, their natural inclination, I feel like, is just to tear it down in every which way. But, think the opposite of that. Like, just like, go into the comic book world with open arms and try to make as many positive connections as you can with people that can help you get along. Mm-hmm. I think if you're honest with your intentions, those people will not assume that you're trying to take advantage of it. Rather, they will want to try to help you, because people generally want to see people succeed. I do. My day is spent trying to help people, get to a position that they want to be in. But at the end of the day, it's like, you want to work and you want to help people that you like, I think. And that's just general, basic, like, here's a life tip, kids. Be likable, because now you're not in school anymore. If you are still in school and you're about to graduate, the real world, people spend 9 to 5. They want to work with people they like. They want to work with people that make it worth it.
Or just don't be fake, because you don't have to be happy, friendly, overly. By the way, just to state one more thing, Pablo Marcos is a good artist and a really awesome human being. He just is not the big superstar of the time that everybody worshipped. So that's why Dick used him as the example. I'm sure that's why the fan brought him up.
Great. Well, we are out of time. So let's wrap up by saying, where can we find you on the internet, and what projects are you working on right now?
You can find me on the internet under my name on Twitter and Facebook. I do not reply to DMs for the most part, because I get too many emails as it is. As I said, I'm working for a startup. Watch for that later next year, or possibly in beta this year. And you'll see me I'll be wandering at a WonderCon, I'll be at San Diego, and I'll be at Comic-Con Revolution Ontario, and I was just talking to Long Beach. I don't know if they want me on their list yet. I'll have to check with them. So, and there's a Star Wars Day in Oceanside in April or May. May obviously. Vince?
Oh, you're keeping busy, Barbara. Wow, that's like
What are weekends?
I know, yeah. I'm similar to Barbara. You can find me as my name on Facebook and Instagram. Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I'm kind of on Twitter, but it's a ghost town. My Twitter page is just, for some reason, I'm never on there. So I stick to Facebook and Instagram. So if you need to reach out to me, you can. But very similar. I mean, I'm just kind of hit or miss on messages. I would be at Comic-Con. I'm still unsure of WonderCon. I know that's really close, but it's very close to me as well. So there's a high chance I'll be there either way.
Isn't there a Kickstarter going on right now?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't want to jump into the promotion, but yeah, we definitely have a Soulfire the Core Kickstarter going on, which our moderator Zen is lettering, so he's going to get the pleasure of working with me on the process. Actually, I was just about to tell you something about that, so I'll tell you once we're off. But yeah, if you guys are on Kickstarter or like Kickstarter projects, Soulfire the Core is a book that we are currently putting on right now, and is going on for 24 more days. So guys, check it out. It's doing great, and hopefully you guys like what you see.
Great. Well, thanks for being with us. You can find me at Hycon Media on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I have Infinitale Chronicles is a book that just came out. You can find that at infinitaalechronicles.com. This Wednesday, Project Wildfire will be out in stores. And in June, we have The Oblivion Trials from Source Point Press. So once again, thanks for joining us. This was a great conversation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Stina, I like the art on your screen.